before we get into contents again, I would like to give you an overview. Let me see where that is. An overview of what we expect in relation to the presentations and to the assignment. So first of all, this is a document that is pretty much finalized. We might make a few additional adaptations, but then we're also going to put it on the Transform platform. And as I said, we're also going to install sort of discussion forums in Moodle where you can then exchange among yourselves. You can use those to discuss within your groups, but also obviously to ask questions to us, or also later on share some of these materials with everyone, right? So the idea would be that once you've done the presentation, or even before the presentation, you could be sharing those materials with everyone for comments, or just, you know, for everyone to have them. And that's what we're working towards. But for now, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what can and should be in the presentations. I mentioned that, or we all mentioned that several times. In the presentations, we want you to be creative, as creative as possible, and as you want and can, right? So you can choose from a range of options. So it's really totally up to you in terms of what you decide to do. Basically, obviously, that's the common denominator. You need to present your course project, but you could do that as an entrepreneurial pitch. You could prepare or produce a video. You could do an animation if you have the skills and the interest of doing that. You could present some kind of a prototype if it's more of a technology based kind of thing. You've built or developed. It could also be some kind of a prototype of I don't know, a new kind of process, etc. Right? Whatever you come up with. I mean, again, sort of picking up on the discussion that we had last time. If you think, you know, is this too crazy or too utopian, feel free to just check back with us. But it's quite unlikely that you're going to get the answer. You can't do this, right? As long as we see that you're really engaged in the subject, and you sort of had intense discussions and made up your mind in terms of, you know, how you wanted to be creative and how you could capture the essence of your innovation project, the course project best, it's quite likely that we're going to agree and be excited that you know, maybe chose some unusual paths to do that. You could also, I mean, focus on presenting and also developing an organization or innovation you have designed on your own. You could also be thinking about how you can enhance the sustainability impact of an existing organization, right? Just think of the many sort of social enterprises, other kinds of organizations that we've talked about initially, and also in the course description. We've mentioned a couple of sort of network organizations such as Enactus, or, you know, this social venture fund at our friends at Queen Mary University in London. So if you want to screen for existing organizations and think about how you might even be sort of, you know, working in relation to what they're doing already, or even getting in touch with them to see, you know, what might be needed on their side, you're totally free, right? So we just give you maximum freedom as long as we see, you know, you have a major investment in this. And the main kind of thing is that you're working on the innovation part, the strategy part, the scaling part, and the impact part of your course project, right? The third option that I just put on here is also that you could have more of a sort of a quantitative focus in what you're doing in terms of really crunching some of the data in relation to the sustainability problem, to really understand where, you know, the problem comes from, what the problem actually is, and then also showing in, I don't know, maybe some kind of simulation or whatever you come up with, how your intervention, how your course project and innovation would be an effective response to that, right? So again, there on both levels, both in terms of how you present, but also what you present, I think there's maximum flexibility here, right? So we stressed several times, we want to experiment a little bit, we want to take risks with you, and it's quite, you know, unlikely that you're going to be punished for anything that's, you know, creative, and at the same time, obviously, it needs to be sound. But still, so there's this encouragement, which you might not have in sort of many other courses. So please feel free to use the opportunity and go into these directions, right? Okay, so much for the presentations. Maybe I'll go into the assignments as well, and then you can ask your questions. Sort of the common denominator in this as well, or something that everyone needs to adhere to in, I would say, in a second step, is the assignment and what's behind the assignment, as well as the individual components that it should have, right? So whereas in the presentations you can be as creative as you want to be, the assignments have some common elements to just make sure this is fair for everyone, that we have a common basis to sort of do the grading on, and that everyone knows clearly what they're supposed to be delivering in the assignments that you're submitting as groups. So the first thing is that it would be great, or that you should implement an engaging title, which really goes into the direction of how you address the sustainability challenge, as well as an abstract, which is a very short sort of lay summary of what you're going, or what you worked on, and some of the key features of what you developed. The second part, and you see that this is inspired by sort of our content and working sessions, right? So the first sort of content part really is the sustainability challenge, where we want to understand what is the sustainability challenge, why are you focusing on this? And we're saying here, don't describe an SDG, right? So be more specific in terms of, what is it that you're really trying to tackle with your course project, and how does the challenge as such even provide links for entrepreneurial or innovative action, right? So that would be sort of the foundation that you're setting, or almost the background against which you're operating, right? Then the second major part is the one on innovation, where you're supposed to lay the foundations of your course project, right? So you go from the more general, what is the sustainability challenge, to a very concrete exemplification of how your innovation addresses the sustainability problem. That involves including considerations on in how far this resonates with principles of frugal or open innovation, and why so. So that would be sort of related to module 1 and our working session. Then strategy, that's directly related to what we're going to discuss today. That has 2 parts, as you've also seen in the lecture last week, and as you will see in a few minutes as I'm picking this up, would be a focus on the business model as well as on integrative strategy, right? On business model, it's more about how is your organization calibrated? How does that relate to how you want to achieve the impact? So our the business model and the impact model in line. Are there trade-offs? You will recall that we discussed some of those last week. So that's sort of the initial part that you're supposed to be focusing on. And the second part here is the integrative strategy, which is mainly what we're going to talk about today. And in the exercise, the social business model canvas is really a mix of talking about classical understandings of business models, but also thinking about partnerships, social value propositions, and so on. Then we have the scaling part, which is things that you haven't come across yet, but which are going to be initiated next week. We want you to illustrate the mode of scaling that you're choosing. So we'll present you with different pathways, and you're supposed to be then figuring out how these relate to your course projects, and what the most sensible way for you would be to reach this scale. And one specific question with regard to this is in how far you would be harnessing ideas of openness, or whether you would rather, that also relates to the entrepreneurial story that we discussed last time and that we're going to pick up, right? So in how far are you sort of growing as an organization, and in how far might you be growing by, for instance, collaborating with others, or using other pathways to actually increase the impact that you're creating. The fourth aspect is on impact. So we would like you to consider what core impacts you want to achieve. That's, of course, closing the loop with a sustainability challenge. So there should be an alignment there in terms of, what are the issues and how are you supposed to address them. And in this case, obviously, we don't expect a fully fledged sort of impact study, but instead considerations on what are the core impact dimensions that you want to assess. How would you track those? So also describing some kind of a measurement or reporting design to some degree, and then showing us in how far these would, influence the decision making in your organization or in relation to your innovation project. And the last part, which is slightly detached from, what we are discussing in those sort of 4 to 5 fundamental parts, is some reflection in terms of, what does that help others do? What would be sort of future possibilities to develop this? We had this in a couple of discussions in the working groups already. I mean, the ideal case would obviously be that you found this kind of organization at some point yourselves. But I mean, there's tons of other possibilities there that you say, or that you outline, possibilities of transfer to other kinds of organizations, to other fields, learnings, I don't know, for practitioners, learnings for entrepreneurs, learnings for policymakers, potentially, depending on what you're focusing on. So that would be the rough sketch of the assignment, and follows on directly, obviously, from the presentations, although this is much more structured and should give you a very clear direction in terms of, what the things are that you're supposed to cover step by step. And as you see, the idea here is really that this is being developed as we go, right? So today we're really going to focus on strategy. We focused already on innovation. And as I said, scaling and impact are going to be developed in the following weeks. Of course, you will need to meet, outside our working sessions and lecture sessions, but our hope would be also through our roles as mentors, that you advance as much as possible within these working sessions and have sort of a forum to sort of do some sparring on your ideas and other concerns that you might have in relation to those things. Right. So I think I'll stop sharing so that I see everyone for a little bit, and we can clarify questions in relation to what I've just discussed. Unless you say that's all crystal clear now and there's nothing left to be discussed, but feel free to bring anything that you might have in mind up. Yeah, Elisa, please.
Yes, just to make it clear, because I think I'm confused. So today we're going to be working on any kind of pitch or presentation about the general idea, and then the document you showed is what we're supposed to be doing throughout the whole course, right?
Exactly. So what I showed is what you're supposed to be doing throughout the whole course, right? So as I said, it's sort of these lecture and working session in which we're developing sort of each of these individual components in a way. And what I just outlined is sort of the big picture, right? What needs to go into the presentation, what needs to go into the assignment. And today we're going to focus on that strategy part, and we're trying to sort of take you by the hand a little bit, but also give you some sort of discussion space in terms of how you can use this social business model canvas in order to, work towards these ideas of integrative strategy and calibrations of the business model. That's right. So today it's not so much about, developing a pitch. It's more about, getting a clear idea of what calibrations of business models and integrative strategy mean in practical terms and in relation to your course projects. But what I presented just now is sort of, as I said, the big picture of what's expected, at the end of the course, so to say.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, Simon, please.
Can you elaborate the time frame of the whole documentary and also the presentation, and also maybe the scope of both?
Sure. I mean, the presentations are going to be scheduled in the last sessions that we have as part of sort of the lecture schedule, right? So the presentation sessions are going to be, I believe, on the 18th of May. So that is something that we're doing as part of the course, right? At some point, we're going to stop feeding you any more contents, and then we have an additional sort of working session where we're sort of also trying to work with you together on your presentations. Then there's going to be a presentation session where, the groups are supposed to present their work. Obviously, not everyone is going to see all of the presentations because we won't manage to do that. So we're going to split you up into smaller groups of potentially, I don't know, 2 to 3, maybe 4 groups, where we will use that 90 minutes that we have in order for you to do your presentations, and then obviously to also have a bit of a discussion between us as sort of the assessors, but also among the group of students, right? So we haven't pre-specified the length of the presentation yet, but I guess it would be something in between 15 to 20 minutes plus maybe 10 minutes of discussion. And then,
yeah, for
and
the documentary.
Exactly, and for the assignment, for the written submission, we set the end of June, just to make sure that, you know, everyone has a common deadline, and, you know, we make sure that you have your grade, because we have different institutions with different, again, time schedules, that everyone has their grades in time. But I think there's a little bit of, well, I mean, you can always submit earlier, if you know, if you have any commitments that are following after. And I think there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of, you know, if you run into problems, to give you a little bit more time, but let's try and aim for the 30th of June for the submission. Right, Roman, please.
Yeah, I have an organizational question. How should we proceed if we have one team member who hasn't been there since the first lecture and didn't participate in any of our meetings yet, and is also not here in this lecture today? Because obviously it would be unfair for us if like this person would get the same grade at the end without doing anything.
No, of course. I mean, we just, I mean, one of the sort of the core philosophical sort of underpinnings of this is we want a bit of exchange among you. We want, you know, groups to work on course project. This is not an individual kind of work. So I think we want to stick with, you know, regarding you as a group, but in a situation as you just described, you should just get in touch, and then we will need to see, you know, whether that person is still actually, you know, actively engaged in the course, or actually at some point didn't notify anyone, but, you know, factually dropped out, which would then just reduce the number of students in your group. And we also have a range of group sizes, from I think 3 to 5 people in the groups, which you also shouldn't worry too much about, right? So the main thing that we want to see, and that's why, I mean, we can keep track of this, not so much in the lecture sessions that we're doing, but in the working sessions, of course, because we see who's there and who's participating and so on. So our goal would be to sort of within groups potentially, you know, not differentiate, or maybe, you know, give someone a bonus if we see there's, you know, very high engagement also in the lecture context and so on. But in this specific case, and if others, you know, are facing the same situation of someone not even showing up, we'll need to sort that out, right? So just, you know, get in touch with us by email. You can contact Tina, and she can channel it then, and then we should be able to settle that, right? So no worries that we're, you know, running into a situation that is unfair to, you know, those who are really engaging, and favoring some who are really sort of disengaged. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any more questions in relation to the presentations and the assignment? As I said, we're going to provide the document. I mean, we might add this information in terms of the duration of the presentations, and also the deadlines, right? When the presentations are going to be held, and when the submission date is. But otherwise, I think that should give you a very, very clear idea of what we expect. Yeah, Maximilian, please.
Maybe I missed this, but do we have to do the written assignment as a group or as an individual?
No, that would also be a group submission, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that, again, it doesn't make sense for you to produce, and I mean, I guess what you see, the basic principle of this course is that we want you to create stuff, right? So we don't want you to, I mean, we wouldn't want every individual member to write their own story of what you did together, but instead, you know, try and sort of push the boundaries in terms of what you can do together as best as that's possible in an online setting, and everything. We're aware of that, but that would be the main goal. Okay. If there's anything else, you can always get in touch, and I mean, you could also raise it later. I suggest we move back into a little bit of input, and then we're going to transit over to the working groups, because you should, in fact, have enough time to actually work on this and to test this stuff out, right? for the sake of time, and because we also want to do it as we did last time, that we have a little bit of discussion time at the end, like at least 15 minutes. I think instead of doing this in a very interactive way, I might just, do a bit of a recap of what we did last time and talk you through a little bit through the main principles that I think, or that we think you should take on board for, your course projects, and what we're going to discuss in a little bit. And then we'll leave you to actually do it. Dominika is going to pick up after me to just briefly introduce the social business model canvas, and then you can jump right into applying it and sort of testing out your ideas of the course projects, right? So what we've, just as a recap then, what we've looked at is this video by Alyssa, a social entrepreneur that is, pursuing some unconventional pathways to increasing her impact. And she was telling us about, the first kind of, I call them impact levers that she was pulling, or she was talking about cannonballs, where she was actually deciding to move from growing as, a sustainable cacao and chocolate producer to actually doing education on sustainable and fair farming practices for, all kinds and big numbers of farmers, right? So basically, what I do here is I try to tease out three different impact levers. The first one, which I just mentioned, is basically that you can scale your impact by pursuing the strategy of going through education instead of, growing on your own, because that's going to lead to a transmission of knowledge, and then you're going to sort of disperse and just leverage the impact that you have by, well, dozens or even more, because you just, as a single entrepreneur, you can't reach this scale and diversity. The second impact lever is that she then, if you watch the video, and I would really, if you haven't done so, encourage you to just watch the whole thing, because one, it's super entertaining, and two, it's really original, is that she describes how she connected and tried to put pressure on big business. So for instance, she as an entrepreneur is collaborating with the Voice Network, which is the biggest NGO in the cacao industry. Basically what she was trying to achieve thereby is that sort of the big players are changing their sourcing behavior and their business practices in order to, have a much bigger effect in terms of what the whole industry was doing, instead of only focusing on what she could achieve on her own and through education, right? So she's leveling it up a step by really looking at, what does the field look like? Who can I pair up with? Who do I need to put pressure on and pair up with? And how can I thereby increase the impact that I'm producing? The third impact lever that she's describing is, and that's quite unusual, right? So you usually think of this as something that sort of big corporations do, right? Lobbying is something where you have those, potentially corporate lawyers that come from a big corporation, and then have sort of their network in the policy field with policymakers, and go there, have lunches, and then they're tweaking legislation and so on according to their own preferences and according to their own needs. You typically wouldn't expect an entrepreneur to do something of this kind. But what she's doing is that she's quite active on sort of a number of levels, including the European level, where she's working with policy organizations, but also policymakers, in order to influence industry standards, right? Which would potentially be sort of the strongest lever that you can have. Obviously, if some corporates change their practices out of some sort of an intrinsical motivation, that's good news. But if you really sort of achieve this change in standards that are, affecting an entire industry, that's going to be basically the biggest impact that you can hope for if you're sort of really working towards increasing fair and sort of sustainability standards in this case, food production, right? So this is basically a shift in mindset, but also a shift in strategy that only looks at the individual organization. Just think of, the last lecture where we're talking about, sustained competitive advantage. It's not about that at all, right? It really is about thinking about impact and thinking about it in an integrative way, right? How can we, instead of I, achieve the biggest impact, and what do I need to do in order to get there? Now, what we've done is in sort of this previous MOOC that we developed, but I think this is very handy in terms of promoting your course projects in particular, is that we were trying to conceptualize this and to really think a bit more deeply about what that means in relation to how you formulate your strategy. So are there specific steps that you can go through to get to this integrative strategy and integrative thinking? So there's a video here as well. I won't play it. I will just briefly summarize it because it also relates directly to what I was just talking about. And you might have guessed, this superwoman here is Alyssa, where we're, really trying to conceptualize different steps that you need to go through in order to get to this integrative strategy. And the nice thing here is that you will recognize some links to what we've discussed last time. For instance, this calibration of business and impact, which you see here in step 5. But you also see links to some of the modules that are going to follow, right? Success metrics, impact levers. That's really about, thinking about impact. And if you recall what I just told you about the assignment, these are things that you're then supposed to be developing as well. So what are the core impact features? How do I find indicators for those? How would I track those? And how do I see whether I've made a difference? But to just take a step back, basically the storyline here, and feel free to really watch the video as well to go through it more slowly, is that the first thing, and that links back to our very first introductory session, be clear on what kind of sustainability challenge you want to address, and then sort of break it down to what exactly you're addressing, right? Picking an SDG is a first step, which you've already done in relation to, forming your groups. But then the next step would be, what exactly am I tackling in this area? The second thing, and that's already where the integrative strategy starts, is that you need to position yourself, right? So you don't think about your organization in a very narrow way, but instead try to imagine how you would stand in a larger context, right? I was already mentioning big food business here. I mentioned the voice network, policymakers. So how will my innovation project, my course project, be located within the bigger scene? And the social business model canvas helps you actually do that in a structured way, to think about, what are competitors, what are partners, what are funding partners, for instance, as well. So where do I get my finance from, for instance? So really thinking about, how does the bigger picture look like, and which role do I play in this bigger picture, is very essential to move towards this integrative strategy. The third step here is, and that's what I was calling the impact levers, or what Alyssa calls the cannonballs, is the solution, right? So really think about, how do I get to the impact? Is it really by growing the organization, or is it through education? Is it through partnering and influencing business partners? Is it through changing policy standards, right? It could be a combination of those. There's not, one thing that you're supposed to do. It could be several of those, but that's really a different way of thinking about how you can achieve, the impact that you want to see on the sustainability challenge. The fourth step is, and that's what I said is connected to the impact, is think about success metrics, right? So for instance, when Alyssa was talking about, I want to change how businesses source, right? What kind of principles they apply when they, buy their cacao. You could check whether there are supply chain standards that changed or improved as a result of what she was doing, right? So that would be one of your core impact criteria. And you would try to track that in order to see what you've actually achieved. Step 5, and that's what I already mentioned, and that's also connected to this other animated video that we watched together last time. It's really about, what does that mean in terms of your calibration? So is the business model in line with the impact model? Do you have a separate business and a separate impact model? Recall these examples that we had last time, and also recall what I said in relation to the assignment. This is really the part where you go into what does that mean for my sort of organizational structure. And this last bit, and that's sort of not that much in the focus of what we're doing or what we're focusing on in Transform. It was much more in the focus of the original Accelerating Investment Readiness MOOC. The question is, how would you, get to your finance in a way, right? So how would you finance your organization in terms of, is it more of a grant model? Is it hybrid revenue? Is it a commercial model? Is it two models at the same time? Dominika was talking to you last time about, social enterprise often running on different legal forms because there's not, a simple answer to how you actually best get to the impact that you want to achieve, right? So I think I'll just leave it there. There are one or two more slides which you're going to have in relation to seeing this from sort of an ecosystems perspective, always trying to locate yourself in relation to others. I think we touched upon that already, and I wouldn't want to sort of waste more time before I hand it over to Dominika for a short introduction on this social business model canvas, and then we're going to put you into the groups so that you can test out the social business model canvas with this particular thing in mind, right? So you're going to re-recognize many of these things just in a different format where you can actually use sticky notes in order to document your ideas around what that means in your specific case.
Okay, are there any questions related to what George just said? Or are you eager to proceed now to get to the group work finally? Okay, doesn't seem that there are urgent questions at the moment. So I will very, very shortly share my screen to remind you of where we stopped with regard to the business model discussion, because this is what we want to focus you on today in the group work, to think your ideas further that you have started developing and discussing, and to get closer towards really developing a business model with which you can realize these ideas. So very basically, we have distinguished in a business model the idea of a value proposition. So what is the economic or the social value that you're proposing to your customers and also to the beneficiaries? Then there are several elements that describe what is your value constellation, how you really want to produce that value to customers or beneficiaries. So who are your key partners? With whom do you need to cooperate? It can be suppliers of products of material that you need for your products. This can be, as Georgie described, NGOs and other types of organizations. Then what are your key activities? Are you producing? Are you providing services? In what way are you doing this? And what resources do you need to do so? Material, equipment, personnel, staff that you need to fulfill your goals and conduct the activities. And then think of, or the model suggests to think of the customers and the beneficiary side. So think about what and how you will establish relations with these groups. Who are in your exact, who are the customer segments? Are you addressing all the people or are subgroups of the population? And in what way will you deliver your value proposition? So many of you, for instance, were talking about online business models where they want to develop platforms. So in this case, this would be more the digital channels that you would use. And then the third part of the business model describes how you capture value and what costs you incur. So think about the types of costs, personal costs, equipment, and so on, and the types of revenue streams. And we have already discussed that this can be quite diverse in the context of social enterprises and organizations that want to achieve an impact. So from revenues, but also donations and other income sources. And we have asked you in preparation of our today's meetings to read the report from Burkett, where I think that he describes quite nicely some examples also of how such a business model could look like for a social enterprise. So, for instance, there is the example of a coffee store that employs people with disabilities that have been unemployed for a long time. And I think what is just very shortly nice to see here, how they distinguish between the commercial model and the impact model using these different colors. And today we want to not rely on this basic business model canvas, but on a further development, the social business model canvas. And I hope you had a chance to to go through it and familiarize yourself a little bit with the different elements. So it looks more or less, it is of course not completely different from what we have seen so far, but it is a little bit more detailed in order to really account better for the particularities of, on the one hand, aiming for economic goals, but also wanting to achieve a social mission, right? So many of the things that you have just seen, such as delivery, key partners, key resources, key activities, you also find here, but there are also some additions. So the focus is on the social value proposition, for instance, and also what is included is the social impact measurement strategy. So you can already have some ideas of what would be indicators to measure the impact of your organization, to measure whether you have achieved your goals on a short, medium, and long-term perspective. But of course, this will be the focus within the next session, so we don't expect you to finish on that. What is also, I think, particular is that it also provides some guiding questions on how to answer or how to fill out and define your business model. For instance, how to develop a social mission, that it should be short, clear, and focus on a target group, for instance. So we are happy to discuss any questions. I don't know, have you already gone through the different elements, and are they so far clear? I think for today, the focus would really be to perhaps start with one or two elements, such as the social value proposition. So what is it that you want to do? What value do you want to provide, in connection also to what we have discussed last week in terms of, or in the last weeks, in terms of innovation? What are the new ideas, and what are the wicked problems or grand challenges that you want to address? But also to not to spend all the time that you have on only one element, which you will probably need, but to get also an overview of the different topics that are suggested here. So, for instance, what is also new, I didn't emphasize that, is that you should think about competitors or potential cooperating partners, and also have some thoughts on the macro environment. So what is the institutional, for instance, infrastructure that is relevant for you as an organization if you develop your ideas further? So what are external expectations, for instance? What economic situation, political situation are you facing, and what elements are relevant for you in particular? So today, I think, again, the idea would be to start working on one part. Perhaps the social value proposition could be a good start, connecting, making stronger connections to what you have discussed over the last weeks. But then also to take some time to go through the different elements and familiarize yourself with them, and then perhaps to ask questions at the end if anything remains unclear. But again, today I will stop sharing first so we can see each other. So we can, if you have any questions already now, please feel free to ask them. And if not, how we will proceed, we will use the next 30 minutes, I would say at least, or 35, to really assign you to your groups, give you the chance to start working with the tool. And perhaps what is one last point I forgot to say, that the link that you got, you can go here on the through this app, through this mural, right? And this is where you find yourself then, and you can really use this to make notes I don't know, who are NGOs, okay, can make some adaptations in terms of how large the text can be and so on, and really use it as a tool to collect your ideas, right? So you don't have to make any notes on PowerPoint slides, but to really use this directly to start discussing your ideas further. As Georgie already said, we each group was assigned 2 mentors. So over the next half hour, we'll visit you. So you will be visited by the respective mentors. So we will get to know each other. And we will guide you a little bit through the today's session, but in particular, we will be the ones who you can always contact if any questions arise and if any problems arise, like the one Roman described in the beginning. So please contact us, let us know. And we can, of course, meet between the sessions, right? If you have any need for consulting and for discussion, then please let us know at all times.
We will also add that overview of mentors and the respective groups to the document that you just saw, that you have that. But I suggest we just now, throw you into the groups, and please do use the mural template. I think that would be really good for you to use as a tool to also develop your course project ideas. And Dominika, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think around 30 minutes of sort of working time, and then maybe 1 or 2 groups, ideally those that haven't said too much in sort of the bigger group yet, could maybe share a little bit of their experience in terms of using the tool and discussing in the groups, right? The group before the next lecture session, and especially before the next working session, because you should really use those in order to work on your course projects, right? So the more you push this towards the end, the more work is going to be left in the end, right? So we encourage you to get in touch outside the course in order to make those decisions. And also, please, if you haven't been able to, that was not the case for all of the groups, but really use the tools that we're providing you with, such as the social business model canvas, to then sort of use those to structure your discussions, basically, right? So that's one kind of a call to action. And then we had just 1 or 2 issues where students were in a group that wasn't really productive, in the sense of people not showing up partly, and we're going to take care of that, and maybe ask some of the groups that are quite small or that had difficulties in recruiting other group members, we might allocate that person there. So that was a very active person on his own, but someone with an unfortunate group constellation. So if you're running into these problems, as was brought up earlier as well, just make us aware, and then we're making sure that you are in a context and in a group that is really working on the issues and where you can advance, right? And now I'm going to shut up on these kinds of issues, just to sort of have this call for action and signal we're taking care of things that are not running smoothly. That's in our authority to do, and we will take care of that. And now I just want to open the floor for maybe 1 or 2 groups, ideally people who we haven't heard talking before in the bigger group, to maybe present some of either the things that they were discussing in relation to the strategy focus, or maybe directly presenting some of the work that they've done on the social business model canvas. Jakob, fantastic, please.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and give you a little overview about our general idea, and then later on, Tushna from my group, she's gonna give you a little insight into our initial business model canvas that we already prepared before the session today.
Oh, fantastic! So, very good.
Carolina from my group kindly prepared a little presentation for our project. So. We are looking into cities and regaining space from cities in order to make the cities more sustainable and also have a social use of these big unused green spaces. As you can see here, for example, companies, they have huge yards or huge gardens they don't really use, and they're just like English grass, if you call it that. Yeah, and we thought maybe it could for example, look more like this, or it could be used as something, maybe, for example, also a safe space where homeless people could put their tents on, maybe have a facility room. It doesn't have to be a company space, but it could also be public space. For example, a park, which is just a big green space, which is not really used in a social way, but only as something, visible. So here we have a little structure of we thought our company could work. So our company would get in touch with corporations or the city or other initiatives who are owners of unused space, and then we would get a project agreement with them, and we would also work together with activists who are willing to do something on the unused space, or maybe even local gardening companies or whoever is interested in reusing the space. And then over time, we would, of course, build up a portfolio that we could then present and tell new clients, look at our portfolio. We have different things. We have maybe gardening. We have social projects, teaching projects to teach kids how to build up a garden, or teach them about environmental questions or whatsoever. And of course, that would build up the portfolio. And with this portfolio, we could go back then to new clients and get them interested in reusing their space, so that we and the whole city, all the citizens can have open space back. So if you will. Okay, yeah. So then I would give over to Tushna with the business model canvas.
Sure, fantastic. Thanks, Jakob. That's just a brief sort of reaction. Fantastic. I mean, in terms of, I think very original, very, one of the challenges is going to be, what exactly is the business case? Is there a business case? But we also said it can be more nonprofit oriented. But this is really great thinking in terms of, really even a creative view on, I think, or a creative perspective on what the sustainability challenge actually is and how you seek to address it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe the business case gets a little more clear, and is also something we're definitely working on, but maybe it gets a little clearer when Tushna talks about the
Sure. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you can see, we filled up the 9 blocks in the business model. And from a business perspective, of course, you think, how are we going to, bring in the revenue? So on one side, we're making social impact, not just by creating green spaces. That's not just one SDG that we're targeting, but there are also these local companies or local gardening companies that have been, ignored, or just with industrialization and with corporatization of, let's say, economies, you have these small guys that may be ignored as part of the economy. So we are helping them also get projects and getting contracts in the bargain. And our revenue stream would obviously be, so say, for example, we first have consulting fees, we have implementation fees. And so we are following a typical consulting model, but forming in our own sort of piecemeal pricing or own unit pricing. So there would be one offering where we have consulting fees, then there would be implementation, then there would be also an option for revenue from maintenance. So we've also thought of scaling, and when we're thinking of scaling, we're not just talking about maybe creating that green space, we're talking about, getting these contractors in place, with getting them in touch with the company or getting them in touch with the right people. And each of these sort of consulting activities or implementation activities would have a piecemeal pricing. And and our cost would basically involve, we're planning to keep it bare minimal, where we have just initial marketing activities, and more like an opportunity cost of the entrepreneurs or us as a team that would be consulting. So you would have a very basic cost structure in the beginning, and your payments towards contractors would be another huge cost. Your salaries towards these guys would be a huge cost, but that would also set off with the revenue that comes in. So that's how we've thought about the model from a revenue and cost structure point of view to, answer the business model. When scaling goes, we've also thought of other sort of increasing our portfolio by just not, as I mentioned, not just having green spaces, but thinking of vertical farming, thinking of the green building project where we are having, green facades or vertical farms, urban farming. So yeah, we're brainstorming, but this is the model that we have as of now.
Very nice. Yeah, I just would want to sort of leave it as is. I think you're completely on the right track. Very creative. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to see. Dominika, you unmuted yourself. Sorry, I'm blabbing too much.
No, that's fine. I think we can, of course, focus on giving you some feedback, but I think for this, you can rather contact the mentors, and perhaps there is another meeting that might be needed. But to use rather the last couple of minutes, perhaps to give another group the chance, right, to present their ideas. And please feel free to present or to talk about your ideas and what you have discussed within the last half hour, even if your model is not yet that elaborate. So I think that is really quite advanced already. We wouldn't have expected that. So please feel free to share some ideas or some concerns perhaps in using the tools, some reflections on that, even if you're more at the beginning of developing the model. Someone would like to share some thoughts and ideas? Yeah, the presentation was too impressive now, probably.
Actually, our group would like to go next. Ours
yes,
is on,
great.
Sure, fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you, Tushna, and the previous group for yours. So from our group, it'll be me, Ben, and Flo who will be presenting. So right now we haven't done a presentation on it yet, and we're still coming up with the concepts. So hence the business canvas was really helpful, because even on the stakeholders part, we got into some very interesting conversations about who are the people that who would be our beneficiaries and customers. So ultimately, we were focusing on quality education, even on inequality. And what we ended up focusing on was providing women the quality to education that they deserve, so as to get them on the same scale as men. And now we're looking at promoting women and empowering them to enter the STEM field more. And we're doing that by creating an ecosystem where you have people from multiple paths, be it women in primary, elementary, college level education in both developed and developing nations, who can come in and get access to that sort of community and education. So one of the pillars that I'd want to discuss is about boot camps. We're looking at boot camps with deferred tuition. So you already have that sort of system there without the community, where ultimately you have people come in, they enter these boot camps from 0 months to 18 months, and they're intense boot camps. And you have tie-ups with companies who ultimately sponsor it. And once you get a job, you end up paying the tuition fee. So in developing nations where you do have to pay tuition fees, be it in Africa, be it in India or China or other Middle Eastern countries where you don't have access to a free degree like in Germany, that you can enter these programs and then have a job later and then pay back once you do get a job. So that is one of the things that we're looking at. Maybe Flo could guide you through the next part.
Yes, thank you. So we were already looking at cooperations with universities. So the idea here was to cooperate with universities and primary schools in developing countries and business partners. So the idea is to give women the possibility to make a university degree by sponsoring the university fees. This is done then by the business corporations. They benefit because they get educated females, which then later can come in the company. And the social part here is that we want the females who get the education funded as an addition to go into developing countries in schools and teach there about STEM topics to young women. So the idea here is to give young girls in developing countries a role model in an area where they probably don't think that they can work there. So yeah. We have the social part here, and also the women going to the countries are really benefiting from this experience probably. But the whole ecosystem behind this, together with the bootcamp, that's not super clear yet. Maybe Ben is going to elaborate a bit on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we were not sure yet really what we want to focus on, whether it's
women attending boot camps to get educated in STEM after graduating high school in probably then developing or developed countries. Although we want to focus on women getting free education, higher education, via companies financing the programs, and then these women getting jobs at said companies to pay back for their tuition. But overall, our idea, pretty much as Flo said, was that women get some sort of free education in the STEM field. And while that was not a new idea, we wanted to focus on, as a lot of women after, for example, finishing high school, a lot of people nowadays make a gap year, go do something social. For example, my girlfriend went to Nicaragua and educated in elementary school. And we wanted to focus on that, combining these developments with a social thought that these women get educated in STEM, and then they can go to countries where education for women, especially, is not yet as viable as for men, for example, and they can get also the basic education. So we can target two issues at once: the issue that women are misrepresented or underrepresented in the STEM field, as well as the basic education in developing or other countries. Maybe that sums it up pretty good.
Yes, thank you a lot. Perhaps as a very first reaction, compared to the example we discussed earlier with the coffee store that employs people with disabilities, your ideas, both that you presented now, are quite complex, right? So there's a lot of things that you have to think about. So you might want to initially focus a little bit more, or think about focusing. Like in the first project you presented, you are offered the various alternative projects, right? Building community gardens, building living space or sleeping spaces, safe spaces for people who live on the streets. This would require quite specific knowledge on these groups. So you might, for this initial stage, really try to elaborate on one of these projects or one of these ideas. In your case, it would be the question whether you would want to focus on one cultural area, right, or one country, in where you can really say, okay, there is a high need, and you can draw a picture of the ecosystem that is already there and the organizations that are already there, just to make sure that you do not increase complexity right at such an early stage. But this, it's completely open still, and we can discuss it further. But just as a first reaction, that you want to achieve a lot, and this is a great starting point. And I think at some point the question is, how can you narrow it down in a way that really you can manage it within this course and develop a really well-funded idea, and think about all the details that you would have to think about.
Just maybe one short addition in terms of, sorry, Gita, before you jump in. At the same time, I love this connectivity and complexity, and really thinking about, we could, mobilize someone through this and through that. And that actually goes into this integrative strategy kind of action, right? Even if you then end up in the end for your presentation or assignment saying, we drew the line here. This is how the big picture looks like. So I love that very much. But Gita.
Yeah, no, thanks. I love it all, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more details from all of you. It's very exciting. So that's just a smaller comment in terms of maybe relating a bit to Dominica's when narrowing it down in terms of, for example, the last group focusing on country or whatever, all the time having in mind how to identify the problem. So, for example, the problem in terms of females underrepresented within STEM topics, whether it lies within societal structures or norms or within the motivation of females, for example. So what would be the solution? Would that be how to attract the females, or would it be, and obviously that question depends on the context also, right? But this constant reminding oneself to keep the focus on identifying the problem before jumping into the solutions, which is like a standard challenge in these projects. Just that.
Yeah, I think sorry, that's a great comment that links us back also to the introductory session, right, where we really try to make clear that these challenges that you're addressing are quite can be conceptualized as wicked problems. So really understanding the problem is really the first challenge, right? Not jumping to the solution, as Gita said, right from the start, but really knowing, okay, what is the problem, who is facing this problem, and how does the context influence your perception, and because it will influence the solution that you choose probably.
And at the same time, it's great that you already think about these, elements of scaling, of impact, and so on, which again, I mean, sort of lean back on those because we're going to develop them together. But I think that's really very good starting points, or exceeding our expectations of where you would be standing. Even those groups that are still sort of in this reflection phase, don't worry too much. I think we'll make sure that you're going to get there in the end. But we're running over time already, so I guess
Yes.
we would just, unless, I mean, Roman and Uwe, if you have sort of urgent questions, please feel free, and otherwise we'll use another occasion for you to present your work. Yeah, Uwe, please.
Yeah, no, it was just kind of a remark to make about thinking about problems, because the funny thing here is that our group actually identified very similar problems with the first group, also starting to think about cities and how to use space, and also with the urban heat island effect. We had a little bit different approach to it, but also similar ideas. So that's interesting, and that I think shows that or how urgent some of the problems really are. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you can also come up with, variations of, what the problem is, but also what the solution is. So that's also a good sign in terms of things sort of distilling around certain issues. And at the same time, also don't worry too much about that. I think there's enough design space for you to sort of develop your own solutions, right?
Exactly.
Thanks, Uwe, for sharing. Yeah. Just maybe as a last remark, fantastic. There's more participation, more people. Keep on going that way. And we'll see each other next week for the lecture on scaling.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.